All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Welcome everyone. Today we are tackling our 4 Middle Ages Extension Seminar video overview. I am absolutely thrilled to dig into this material with you because we are going to unpack how massive, earth-shattering historical shifts completely redefined human society as we know it.
And just so we're all on exactly the same page, please take a quick mental note of our exact lesson ID for today. Social, Modern, Unit 03, Lesson Pack 09, Middle Ages Extension Seminar Video Overview. Got it? Perfect. Let's get to it.
So, here is our roadmap for this session. We'll start by debunking the myth, then cover feudalism, faith, and fragmentation. After that, we'll hit the Black Death crisis, shift into arguing institutional change, review your seminar questions, and finally tackle our transfer task, crisis changes.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Debunking the Myth.
You know, there is this incredibly persistent myth out there that the post-Roman world was just a stagnant, totally unchanging dark age. But the documented reality, it tells a completely different story. This was actually an incredibly dynamic era of acculturation. We're talking about the active blending of old Roman bureaucratic traditions with Germanic warrior cultures and evolving Christian institutions. It absolutely wasn't a time of people just sitting around in the dark waiting for the Renaissance. It was a period of shifting empires, massive long-term institutional change, and genuine survival through adaptation.
Moving right along to Section 2, Feudalism, Faith, and Fragmentation.
When the central political order of Rome fragmented, a new social system had to emerge out of a basic everyday need for security. Think of it like a giant pyramid. Power trickled down from kings at the very top to lords who granted lands to vassals in exchange for military service. But the absolutely crucial takeaway here is at the very bottom, the serfs. They made up the largest class of people by far, yet they were entirely unfree. As agricultural laborers, they were tied directly to the land. They couldn't just pack up and leave. They couldn't even marry without their lord's permission, and they owed a staggering amount of their own labor just to survive. It was a strictly fixed, almost inescapable social ladder.
But hey, society wasn't defined only by rigid class hierarchies. Religion was also a deeply unifying and sometimes complex force across the world. A really beautiful example of this is the concept of convivencia in Spain, specifically in the region of Al-Andalus. While much of Europe was heavily fragmented, this specific area experienced a period characterized by remarkable coexistence. Christians, Muslims, and Jewish people lived, worked, and interacted in close proximity. They created a multi-religious and multi-ethnic society that actually rivaled places like Constantinople as a major center for trade and learning. It really goes to show us that even in a fractured world, dynamic cultural blending was entirely possible.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Black Death crisis.
Now, we often think of global trade as a purely modern thing, right? Well, tracking the plague reveals just how deeply interconnected these medieval trade networks truly were. Originating in the East, with absolutely devastating epidemics hitting China in the 1330s, the plague basically hitchhiked on the very arteries of global commerce, the Silk Roads and massive maritime shipping routes. By 1346, it had reached the bustling trade hub of Kaffa on the Black Sea. From there, merchant ships literally carried flea-infested rats directly into the bustling ports of Italy. It's a stark reminder that the globalization of trade also meant the rapid globalization of disease.
Let's dive into Section 4, Arguing Institutional Change.
Okay, here is the core pedagogical moment for your seminar prep. This is the massive, arguable claim we are building today. We are arguing that catastrophic crises actually drove institutional progress. Rather than just ending the world outright, the devastating shock of the plague forced a highly rigid society to bend, break, and ultimately to transform.
Let's look at a direct before and after comparison of our evidence. Before the plague hit, under Source 13.1, serfs faced absolute limitations, completely tied to the land they worked. But after the plague, as we can clearly see in Source 16.4, the staggering population loss created a massive labor shortage. Suddenly, the surviving peasants had real leverage, its basic supply and demand. They could finally press their employers for higher wages and better rights. They actually began leaving those old feudal estates to seek out much better wage labor elsewhere.
So, what does this all mean for our interpretation? It means this massive demographic shock essentially broke the rigid dependency of the entire feudal system.
Think about it. That old hierarchy simply couldn't survive when its foundational labor force was suddenly decimated. It shifted massive economic power directly into the hands of the surviving laborers and merchant classes, effectively triggering the death of rigid feudalism. It's a real game changer.
But wait. A strong historical argument always anticipates resistance, right? Power rarely just hands itself over peacefully. Elite landlords actively use the law to try and force society right back to the pre-plague status quo. A perfect piece of evidence for this counterclaim is the 1351 Statute of Laborers over in England. This law literally required laborers to accept the lower wages that existed before the Black Death even happened. The elites were desperately trying to put a lid on this sudden wave of social mobility.
All right, moving into Section 5, Seminar Questions.
Having modeled the thesis, the evidence, and the counterclaim, it's time to arm you with the specific questions you'll be tackling in class. Here is your first evidence-based question to write down. How did the decentralized power of feudalism make European societies more or less vulnerable to the systemic shock of the Black Death? You're going to need to argue how political fragmentation impacted the response to the disease. Did lacking a strong central government make it harder to coordinate a response? Or did the isolated rural nature of those manners actually offer some distinct protections? You'll need to weigh that evidence carefully.
And for your second question, you really must debate human nature and systemic power. Does the evidence from the 14th century labor shift suggest that catastrophic crises are actually necessary to break entrenched social hierarchies? Look back at how deeply rooted that serfdom system was. Ask yourself, could anything short of the Black Death have given the peasantry enough leverage to demand better wages and real mobility? It's a heavy question. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, Transfer Task Crisis Changes.
The absolute best historians always connect the past directly to the present. We can draw a very direct line between the 14th century and the 21st century here. Just as the Black Death caused massive labor shortages that broke down feudal land ties and empowered surviving peasants, our modern COVID-19 pandemic severely disrupted global supply chains, completely revolutionized remote work, and created its very own modern labor shortages. It really revealed some deep, underlying vulnerabilities in our modern global food and logistics systems, didn't it?
So, I leave you with this final thought. Will the crises of our own time fundamentally redefine our institutions, just as the plague brought an end to feudalism? It is definitely a profound thought to ponder as we conclude our Four Middle Ages Extension Seminar video overview. And once again, that lesson ID is Social Modern, Unit 03, Lesson Pack 09, Middle Ages, Extension Seminar Video Overview. Thank you so much for exploring this incredible history with me today, and best of luck in your seminar.